What's really going on when people argue about money? Some wealthy people hoard. Others, with lesser means, spend more than they have. In other households, individuals, couples, and families argue over finances. Through a fun and enlightening card game, learn your Money Habitudes, a hybrid word linking habits and attitudes about money. Join the conversation with a master, SYBLE Solomon, creator of the Money Habitudes cards and guides. With no further introduction, SYBLE, welcome. Actually, welcome back. And we want to fill everybody in a little. I have actually followed SYBLE around the country. I don't even know how many times she and her husband have relocated, but I know we met in Connecticut and we visited in, I think, Maryland when you were living somewhere around DC. And then the last place we were in North Carolina in Wilmington, and then you were heading in an RV to do the country. So that's where we left off. So fill us in on just where you are now, because I know now she's cross country. And I believe you followed children and are out in Montana now. Is that correct?
So yes, we live in Montana. We're in the southwest corner, an hour south of Missoula, the closest Costco. And I can look out my window and we're in the Bitterroot Valley. So if any of you saw the river runs through it, that it was filmed here. If I look in one direction, I see the Sapphire Mountains. And if I look in the other direction, I see the Bitterroot Mountains. And we have a lot of snow on both mountain ranges right now. But the valley where I am hasn't gotten the snow yet. It's just cold. So hopefully, Joyce, you and the others will one day come and visit me in Montana.
Terrific. We'd love to. So fill us in, just go back early years, fill us in a little on just your career, how this has evolved, and where you are now decades later.
Okay. So the interesting thing is I have never particularly had any interest in money. I have no professional background when it comes to money. I have, when I started this, I not only had no professional background, I had no professional network. I had no credentials. I had nothing. So I just want to say for anybody who's looking to change their career, to start something new, don't feel that if you don't have all your credentials in order, that you can't jump off and do that. I was 50. I went back to school. I had been in early childhood special education. And within that, I did a lot of training. I did a lot of traveling. I developed a lot of programs. I got to be in a really great position where I worked in between school systems, the medical community, parenting community, social agencies around young children, birth to 3, with special needs. And when I started in it, I seemed to have a preponderance for going into fields before they become fields. So early childhood at that point wasn't actually a field. There were no regulations that even mandated that school systems or anybody needed to provide services to families with children with special needs. And in fact, at the time with insurance, if you had a baby born with special needs, it was considered a pre-existing condition and it wouldn't be covered by your insurance. So fortunately, we've come a long way with both education and the medical community with that. But, life happens. And when I was 50, I decided I was just going to go back to school and get a degree. And I had another degree. And I had started doing executive coaching. And I'll pass on how that transition happened. But it did happen. And actually, in many ways, I think executives are often 3-year-olds, all grown up in very different looking clothes. But underneath, we still are whomever we are. And I decided to go back to school at 50 and get a degree in counseling. And that didn't work, but I ended up getting a degree in gerontology. And I focused on the retirement community. And people didn't want to talk about retirement then. And that's about when I met Joyce. So it morphed into life planning and looking at your life, not necessarily just looking at what you wanted it to look like in retirement, but also looking at what do you want it to look like today? What do you want it to look like a month from now, a year from now? And what types of things do you need to put in place in order to do that? So I developed this program called Hot Flash, actually, and it had 8 areas of life. And the one that I got the most questions about was always finance. People would come up to me and ask me questions that caught me so off guard and tell me stories. One woman, for example, had been a feminist from, I think, the day that she was born. She was just an incredible woman, an incredible advocate for women. And during the break, when I was doing a training, she asked me how she would know if her name was on stocks that she and her husband had purchased. And this was before everybody had easy access to finding out everything on the computer. And I said, well, you need to talk to your broker. And if your name is on the stocks, then just ask to come in and talk to your broker and have them have him explain it, what you have. And if your name's not on the stocks, then you and your husband need to have a conversation about why your name isn't on those stocks. And 6 months later, I didn't know her at the time. I happened to run into her in a store, and she said to me that she finally got the courage, this women's advocate, she finally got the courage to ask her husband about the stocks. And I was stunned, of all people, that she couldn't talk about money with her husband. And there were a lot of those types of incidences that led me to say, I don't understand this. I'm just curious. I think if you're really curious about something, that's a good way to start. And I was just really curious about why people didn't talk about money, why people told me some of the stories about the debt that they had that was phenomenal. This young woman in her early 30s had been raised by a single mom, lived in a trailer, became a waitress when she was, 15 or so, gave all of her money to her mom to help pay bills, but she would keep a little bit and hide it. And then when she would buy something for herself, she would hide it. She would put it under her bed, or she wouldn't tell her mom. And I didn't understand that either. But I do have to digress for a moment and say that so many people have told me about hiding things. And one day I was driving in the car with my husband, and I realized that I hid stuff all the time, and I was totally unaware I was doing it. That when I would buy something, when I'd come home, I would just put it in the closet, put it in a drawer. And when I'd wear it, if my husband would say, oh, is that new? I'd say, oh, no, I've had this for months. I've had this a long time. And it was all because of these messages that I had in the back of my head, that from being a child, and my mother saying, when she bought me something, don't tell your father, that I transferred that to don't tell your husband, don't tell anybody when you spend money. It's not appropriate. So my curiosity just led me to start reading and researching. And I could go from there, but let me stop for a moment.
Well, no, that's fine. So from that beginning, how did it evolve? Because obviously from the interest, there are other chapters to lay on top of this. So from there, what happened to create really the industry that you have created?
Well, thanks. So one thing is I started looking for conferences to learn more, and I started doing research. And that was when I met Joyce, because at the time, her label was life planning specialist. And I had never heard of that before, but it seemed like that's what I was interested in doing. So we met at a conference. I started going to any kind of conferences that sounded like they would help me understand this. And I started doing research. And the research that I did came out with 3 things. One was that money is the most difficult topic to talk about. When we're talking about money, we're never talking about money, hardly ever. We're talking about what we associate with money, what our past experiences are with money, and what money means to us. So just put in the chat, I'd be curious as I'm talking. When you think about money, what does it mean to you? What do you associate money with? And just, toss some stuff in the chat. Let's see what you come up with. John Gottman, who's a PhD psychologist, said that when he did this himself, he came up with 100 different associations, and then he stopped. So I see Tim put in options. Anyone else? Other typical kinds of things. Freedom, yes, peace of mind. And freedom also means choice, having the choices that you want to try something new, to leave a job you don't like, to have the choice of staying in your own home and having somebody come in if you need help, versus if you need to go into a facility, having the choice of what facility, independence. Okay. Security, absolutely. Being able to do something I wouldn't be able to do, comfort. Okay. It also represents things like love and status, being generous, being rejected. It has, for some people, money represents fear, represents, bad things, being able to splurge. I deserve it. Yeah, a lot of people associate money with fear, and that the whole bag lady type of syndrome, which actually is a syndrome. It's not just something that we talk about. A lot of people are so afraid that they're going to lose everything, regardless of how much money they have. Being a change agent, it's my time. I wasn't supposed to ask for it. Ah, yes. So money was something we didn't talk about. You weren't supposed to ask for it. You're supposed to be independent, take care of yourself, maybe. Okay, so that was one of the biggest takeaways in the research, was that money was associated with so many different things that it was the most difficult topic to talk about. The second thing the research showed was that what people say and what they do are not necessarily aligned at all. So people might say they really care about planning for the future, having enough money, that they want enough money so they have an emergency account, that there's certain things that they want to do, that they want to try. But it requires paying attention to how much money you have. And often they spend their money as opposed to saving it in a way that would be helpful. So even though people say that they have goals, even though people really believe what they're telling you, it doesn't necessarily mean that their behaviors will be aligned to that. And then the third thing that came out of the research is that what we say and what we do, that we often have absolutely no idea why we did it. And when we start, now that we have all the brain research with neurofinance, neuroeconomics, where they hook, the brain up and look at the brain waves when different financial questions are asked, it becomes really very apparent that when we're making decisions, we think that we're making decisions based in the neocortex, the newest part of the brain, where we're logical and rational, where we look at facts and figures, where we say we're at point A, we want to go to point B. How do we do that? Right? So that when we talk about making a decision, we feel like that's what we're doing, right? But when we hook people up to these different monitors and scan their brains while they're making decisions and reacting, what we see is it's not that part of the brain, but it's the emotional part of the brain, which is the limbic system and the reptilian system. That's actually the part of the brain that's lighting up. So the limbic system is very much focused on the present. It likes pleasure over pain. So if there's something we want to do it now. And we're really good at rationalizing because we make our decisions that way. And then we go back and we rationalize why we stopped to get dinner when we knew that we had said we were only going to eat dinner out once a week, and now we're up to 3 times a week. But we can rationalize, oh, it was a really bad day. I didn't get to eat breakfast. I had to do a really quick, hurried lunch. I really deserve this. There's nothing in the house. I don't have time to stop. So we rationalize it. But we actually made the decision, not from the logical part of our brain, but from the limbic system. And the other part of the emotional brain is the reptilian part. And that's the oldest part of the brain. And once we get in there, it's only survival, right? Whatever decisions we make, we're not concerned about the present or the future. It's how can we keep ourselves safe? And the only option we have is fight, flight, or freeze. And often people, I volunteer with people who are in domestic violence situations. And if something for their safety, they're going to give money to somebody who they fear, just for their safety. And maybe that they are now in a safe environment. Maybe they've left their abuser. They have a whole new life. And something happens. Somebody says something in their day just happens. And like this, they go right back to the reptilian part of their brain of freezing or needing to flee or needing to get out of that situation. And often they don't even make that connection, right? So that's what came out of the research. And after I did that, I said, you know what? We need a way to talk about money. We need a way to find out what motivates us. Why do we do what we do? And because of my background in special education, I felt like it had to be something fun, because if you just tell people something, or you make it really onerous, they're not going to want to do it. So we wanted to have something that was fun, something that was familiar. So the original Money Habitudes is a deck of cards, which we still have. And we wanted it to be not to put people in the left side of their brain where they're thinking, what should I be answering? What's the right answer? But where they're just kind of responding and reacting to the statements. So we came up with the Money Habitudes game, 54 statements that people can respond to. And hopefully, as people do that, they think, oh, this is something I understand and I really want to talk about with somebody. I've never really thought about this before. I'll give you one quick example. Is one of them is, would you, I forget exactly how it's worded, but it's something like, when you buy something, you'll only buy something if it's really practical. And a woman called me up a few months after she had done this. She actually was from Switzerland. And she said, there was that one card, and this was the card she was talking about. And she said, it really bothered me, because she said she would only buy things that were really practical. And after she thought about it, what she realized was that she had been a single mom with no money, and she had to count every penny. She was a teacher. So then at this point now, years later, she's the head of a department at a university in Switzerland. Her daughter is grown and lovely, and she's still living the same way. And after reading that card, she said, I went out and I bought a potato peeler and I hired somebody to help with the lawn. And I went, seriously? You bought a potato peeler? And she said, well, when you're poor, you don't need a potato peeler. You can peel a potato with a knife. It's like, okay. So it brings up lots of things, just reading the cards. And then when you get done, you can see from the balance of what your cards are, is it working for you or is it working against you? And if it's working for you, keep at it. That's great. And if you find that you're out of balance in some places that's not helpful, then you could start thinking, what are the places that I could put things that I can start predicting when I'm going to react differently than I want to. And you could start figuring out how you can respond differently, and you can practice. So, Jacqueline, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you're still on the line, I'm curious because I know you said that you had done it. What was your reaction after doing Money Habitudes?
I think you were talking to me, Josephine.
Yeah.
Talking to Joseph.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Josephine.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I wasn't surprised with the outcome, and security was my top number one. Planning was second. Spontaneous was third. Status was fourth. Giving was fifth, and carefree was not on the list at all. I mean, it was not a priority. So I guess I wondered, how would I get some in the carefree? Like, just, I guess I don't spend money for fun things too easily, though. I'll go to the movies and I'll go to shows, and if I'm invited somewhere, I won't hesitate to pay for it. So I don't, any thoughts on that?
Could I ask how many statements you had in security?
I didn't write that down, but it was the largest one. It was just about even with the planning. Okay. I copied the circle, the pie circle of how it played out. Yeah.
Right.
And there were the two. They took up half of the pie.
Right. So I'm impressed that spontaneous was your third one. Right. So I actually can't speak directly to yours, but let me give you some general types of things. A lot of times, people who have a lot of security, that they have messages in the back of their head that, because security can represent control and power, right? And sometimes when people have had difficult things happen in the past, then they hold on to money very carefully. They plan their money. They might keep money secrets. They may hide money because that's what really represents a foundation. And when Vicki had brought up about the bag lady, sometimes you see that as well, is it doesn't really matter how much people have, they never feel like there's enough, right? So with security, it's an interesting one because depending upon where you are in your life, what security means to you may be very different. So as people are going through the beginning, the mid part of their adult life, security may be very important because they want to make sure that they have enough for the future. They want to make sure they have emergencies. If there's children, they want to make sure that they're planning for their child's, education. So they're very careful with that. When you do Money Habitudes, there's 9 statements for each of the habitudes. If somebody gets 7, 8, or 9, sounds like you may have been up there, but you may have been 5 or 6, that they may be holding on to money so tightly. And then the question is, what's the story behind that? Are they holding on to money really tightly because they need to, because they really have very specific plans and they're saving for that? Has something just happened where they realize, wow, I just lost my job. I need to hold on to my money and be really careful with it. And that makes sense, right? On the other hand, and then having spontaneous in there, if you build in some spontaneous, if you make sure you have some money so you can do, you can do some things that are fun that may not be practical. On the other hand, when you get to be retirement age and older, I'd like to look at security in a different way. On one hand, if somebody has saved for retirement and they have enough money in the bank and in investments, and their debt is either paid off or, pretty minimal, very manageable at this point, and all of that is in place, and they're still getting 7, 8, or 9 of those statements in their That's Me pile, then my question would be, please tell me the story, because will that person ever know when they have enough? Many of us have this big empty space inside of us because of some things that have happened in our past. It may be from our own personal experiences. We may have inherited the depression mentality from a parent, a grandparent. And as a result, there's always such a fear that you're not going to have enough, that you could lose everything that you have, that it doesn't matter how much you have, there's still that big empty space and you can't enjoy your money. You can't do things with it. So my recommendation is for everybody to think about what would it take for you to feel secure, financially secure? And if the answer that you give yourself is I'll never feel financially secure, then this has nothing to do with money. This is something that if you want to consider talking to a counselor, getting to understand yourself a little bit better, getting to understand what is enough for you, then that might make a difference. So that would be my recommendation. If you get a lot in security and you really actually have put all your ducks in a row, you're in a good place, but you can't let go of that. Enjoy your money enough. Feel like you can be generous when you want to be. Then you might want to talk to somebody. And let me see.
Before we go into there's some really interesting comments coming up in the chat box, but could you just, for the benefit of the folks who have not had a chance to do it, describe the 6 money habitudes?
Okay, I can do that. And I want to read what's here. So there are 6 habitudes. They're based on research. When I did the research, I did it in, I looked at the research in finance, psychology, behavioral economics, and addictions. And I started seeing themes and that kept repeating. And that's how I based the money habitudes. So what we were just talking about is security, where money represents to you feeling safe and secure financially. Planning is where you use your money for some goal, for something that you have in mind. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a good goal, but it's your goal. And that when you get money, you'll automatically put that towards what it is that is important to you, right? Spontaneous is money represents the freedom to enjoy the moment. And carefree is it's not a priority. Just kind of let it roll. You don't necessarily know where your money is, what your money's doing, how much you have, where it's disappeared to. And then the last 2 are status. And status is not a bad thing. I think oftentimes we go there. Status just means you want to make a good impression. So it's only a matter of if you're using your money in a way that's either doesn't have integrity, or you're overusing it, or maybe you're putting the other person in an awkward situation, but you just want to make a good impression. And then the last one is giving. And giving, people give for a lot of different reasons. In money habitudes, giving is when you give because of the joy of giving. Lots of times people don't get giving and they go, oh my gosh, I'm very generous, but they give because of planning. And they feel socially responsible, so that they plan how much they're going to give. It's not necessarily for the joy of it, although they get pleasure from, helping other people. But sometimes giving can be enabling. And actually, sometimes when people give a lot, they're taking away from the other person the ability to feel that they can do it themselves and that they can be responsible. So if you give a lot, particularly to individuals, to your children, to a family member, to a friend, you might want to step back and ask yourself, am I doing it really to help this other person? Or what am I getting out of it? And is it really helping the other person, or is it enabling them so that they're not being encouraged to do what they need to do to move on with their lives? And have they become dependent upon me? Certainly there's some situations where people are going to be dependent upon you, and that's appropriate. But sometimes we put ourselves in situations, and then lots of times we start resenting those situations where people are dependent upon us. So those are the 6 habitudes. They're
Great.
all good. Any of them overused can be a problem. Any of them underused can be a problem, but they're all good. Right? And I wanted to see what the comment was in here.
Okay. Yeah. And while that's Vicky's question, and Vicky, you might want to speak to that. And also, after you're done with that, Sybil, share a little, because you have used this in so many different situations, from the National Football League to speaking at conferences all over the world, to various groups of different industries. And so you want to share a little about the breadth and depth of how these cards can be used, and where you already have used them. But Vicky, go ahead and frame your question so that Sybil can answer it.
Okay, so we had a gimme from McConnell, who either blinked or whatever he did, but we agreed that we should the nation should continue to pay its bills. But when those kinds of things happen, you start I do, and we do, start calling your financial planner and say, okay, what do we do? Should we pull it out? Should we stay? What should we do? So here we have a showdown coming in December again, with McConnell not being held hostage to the Democrats, saying, we're not doing anything. You're on your own. So hopefully there's a way that we can avoid this, but the impact that plays on all the things that are here, security, planning, giving, all of those things are impacted by the fact that this might occur. And it might bring down our savings and our investments. So what thoughts do you have, since you've worked in this field and have seen this happen perhaps other times, that can help allay fears or create some secure peace of mind as this battle goes on with the games they're playing in Washington?
Well, that's a big one. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to say, you've heard a million times before, is don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that certainly can help. But you make a really good point that's a very realistic fear. Something happens and most of your money is in stocks, and then the stock market falls apart. If you're younger, there's time for that to build up. If you're older, you're not really sure what's going to happen with that. We've also seen the same thing happen with the housing market, where people were so reliant on their houses becoming their major investment. And then when the market fell apart and they couldn't even sell their houses, or they were upside down, it's a real fear. So I guess the one thing I would say is to really sit, if you have a significant amount of money that's in things like stocks and real estate or other types of investments, if you continue to accumulate debt, that it's really time to sit back and take a look at what you've got, where your money is, and see just how vulnerable you are. Some of the people who get the most upset actually have enough money that, yes, they're vulnerable to losing it, but even if they lost 50% of it, they could still live a pretty good life. And to start thinking about, before it happens, what are adjustments that you can make, so that if you did feel a need to pull back, and your reality is that you need to pull back, to be prepared for it, to think about it before it happens. The other thing that I'd recommend is that people, we don't like talking about money, but when it doesn't have to be a formal sit down. This is a really serious, horrible thing we have to talk about. But when you're talking to your adult children, bring up this topic and talk about what are some of the realities of your situation. It may be that your children are in better stead, and a big piece of what's holding you is that you want to make sure that your children are taken care of. And that gets you upset, where in fact your children may be doing just fine. Just there's just so many pieces to it, but to try and have an honest conversation about where you are you even willing to talk about the amount of money that you have, what your investments are with your adult children, and see where that conversation goes. There is no silver bullet, but get a really realistic handle on what you have. What I find a number of times with people who are nearing retirement or are in retirement is that there's really no connection between what they think they have and what they actually have. And particularly for women, a lot of times they don't pay attention, and their spouse may have a good idea of where they're at, but they don't know what's fluid. They don't know what's tied up in other things. So I think the number one thing is really know what your situation is. And the number two thing is talk to somebody, get advice, make sure not everything is in one basket. And three, have honest conversations with your family for your future. Best I can do.
So I think we should turn it open, like if anybody has questions, and then Joyce, we can follow up on the question that you had asked. Because it's
great. Yeah, no, we want to open it up. So ask away. Who would like the floor? Anybody have a question, comment, thought, observation? Tim, you're on.
Hey, first of all, very, very interesting. I'm just wondering, let's say you're working on the 6 money habitudes and you're doing just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then something traumatic happens. Your kids move back in with you. That was not part of the plan. Stuff like that. Does it kind of erase a lot of what does brain science say? That could you end up really getting a big setback when something like that happens because you're not prepared for it, and it erases all the efforts? I'm just kind of curious about that.
So one of the things with Money Habitudes, unlike some of the other psychological tests that you can take, and they say you are this and you're that for the rest of your life.
Right.
That's not true with Money Habitudes. Money Habitudes is if you get 7, 8, or 9 of those statements, the chances are that this is a message that's really strong in the back of your head. It's unlikely that it's going to flip-flop all the way to 0, 1, or 2, or 3, or even 4, right? So what we often find is that, let's go back to security, having a very, security being really important, that when somebody initially does it, life's going fine, and they have a really healthy attitude about their money, and they've done, like you're saying, they've done what they needed to do, things were fine. So you might see that their security cards now go into this sometimes, because when you're sorting these, you're reading each statement and saying that's like me. Sometimes it depends on the situation, who's there, or it's no, that's never me. That's just not me. So in a situation like you're saying, kids moving back in, maybe things were going along just fine. So a lot of your security cards would have been in your sometimes pile. It was important, but it's not a big priority to you right now. Now the kids come in and you're paying to feed an extra 4 people with grandchildren, and they may not be having money. So you might be having to give them money. And now what you'll see very likely is that your security cards are going to come into your that's me pile, because now security is being a little bit threatened. And whereas before they moved in, you might have said, oh, let's get seasons tickets to go to these shows before COVID. That now you might say, you know, we might not want to spend a few $100s getting seasons tickets. Let's be more careful. Let's pick one or two of them and do it. So it's not that you've actually changed, but you have adapted to the situation and your priorities, you know, have changed. If security was a 9, the chances are, number one, you would really think twice about letting your kids move back in with you unless they had a plan that you might be charging them to live with you, that you might have a financial agreement with them about what will happen when they're living with you or what they're going to owe you when they finally move out. People who have very high security often want total accountability anytime that they give money or have a money transaction with someone else. Does that help?
That's a great explanation. I like that. Very nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, somebody else. And
Just one real quick one, and then I'm afraid I have to run to another meeting. You had the me pile, the sometimes pile, and the not me pile.
Mhm.
So do you pay attention to the other 2 piles or just the it's me?
Oh, I love it. So if you're just doing it for yourself, you have all the time to do whatever you want. And I'll go into that in a sec. If you're doing it with a group of people, as a class or in a workshop or something, the chances are that you're just not going to get to the point where you can go any deeper than just looking at the that's me pile. However, the other piles are very interesting. So if, for example, you don't get any carefree in your that's me pile, then you look into the where is it? If all 9 of those cards or most of them are in the that's not me pile, well, now there's a conversation that you want to have with yourself or with someone else. Why can you never be carefree? Why is it so important to you that you always have to be on task in doing what you need to do, right? So that's one thing. If some of them are in the that's not me pile, some of them are in the sometimes me pile, then you ask yourself, well, let's take spontaneous as an example. You don't get any in the that's me pile. You have all security and planning stuff there. If you get some of them in the that's sometimes me pile and some in the not me pile, then the questions you ask yourself are the age-old questions: who, what, where, when, how. Who am I with when I tend to be more spontaneous? Where am I? What's the situation? How am I feeling? What's going on with me in that moment? And I don't know about all of you, but when I'm with Joyce, and I bet many of you have a lot of experiences with Joyce. When I'm with Joyce,
Whoops.
I feel like that I should have a good time. And where normally I would just probably on my own, because I'm introverted, I would probably just go and get dinner someplace inexpensive, bring it back to my hotel room. When I'm with Joyce, I want to go to a nice restaurant and have a really good time because she brings that out in me. And I appreciate that, right? So I know that Joyce is one of those people who will take me more into my spontaneous self, right?
but also Sybil taught me, and Marnie, it relates to what you said about money messages and the things that we heard when we were kids, like money doesn't grow on trees. I heard rich or poor, it's good to have money. I did whatever you heard, and how it resonates and it sits with you for the rest of your life. And sometimes you have to rethink, well, that's my mom and me coming out, or that was somebody else's value system. It's not how I feel about right now. And interestingly, I did have that in my, going for a hot dog was like a big deal. And when I grew up, there weren't a lot of restaurants, but we didn't go to them at all. And it's just, and now I think I get into I deserve it. And so I take those and put them in that's me, because that's who I want to be now, because I heard those money messages and I've stopped listening to them. I have a thing about buying a lottery ticket also. I think somebody's got to win it. Why not me? And so some people say it's a waste of money. Well, it's that spontaneity, and it's that for me, it came out of that money doesn't grow on trees and you save it. And now it's not rebellion. It's just, I have, and I want to do, I'll be careful, and I'll be, planful and all those other money, the Money Habitudes cards. Yet there's that little part of me that wants to enjoy.
Mm-hmm. And that's great, right? We all should have money to enjoy.
Yeah.
And if any of you have a lot of security cards and you're finding it really difficult to part with your money and to enjoy it, put a little bit aside. It could be $5, and do something with it to make you happy. I just recently heard a podcast by someone who I've known for years by email, but I've never met her. And she's a lovely young woman. And she made the decision, because her family was very giving, that as an adult, 10% of what she earns, she gives away. And it's not always 10%. It could maybe less if she's going through a difficult time. But basically, she made that commitment. And her husband actually gives even more than she does. But the point was, she said, when you talk about spontaneous spending, she said, I get a high out of saying, wow, I know that I have $2,000 that I can give to this cause. And she said, that's how I get my high. That's how I spend my money, is by giving it. And it was such a refreshing and interesting perspective to do. But she also is very clear about saving her money, about knowing how much she has, and about being very, very responsible with her money. And she never, ever implies to any other person that they should be doing what she's doing. But if that they want to give, that they should think about how they could give. Maybe it's $10, maybe it's $100 or $1,000 or $100,000. But you just give what feels good to you. So Joyce is very responsible.
Does anybody else have a question? Because one of the folks not on the call asked the question about, please find out, how does the National Football League, with all the money those guys make, how do you use Money Habitudes with that group?
So, the National Football League really spends a lot of time trying to help them make good decisions. They set them up with financial planners. They try and give them lots of training and stuff like that. The number one thing that these guys do with their money when they start getting their money is they buy their mother a house. Number one thing. And then you look at, well, that sounds kind of interesting. So depending upon their money habitudes, the house they buy for their mother is an extremely expensive house. They put the down payment on it. Maybe they're making the payments. They buy a really neat house in a really affluent neighborhood. And their mother is a fish out of water, very uncomfortable, most likely, and doesn't really know how to make friends or how to live like that. And it basically cuts her off in many ways from her family and from her friends. And then, just like people who win the lottery, within 3 years of retirement and not getting their money, what you see is that I think it's 79% of lottery winners, NFL, the basketball players even higher, are in financial distress, right? So what happens after those few years is then they may lose the house. They may not be able to afford the payments, whereas somebody else might also get their mother a house, but buy a more modest house in a more modest neighborhood, or maybe in the same neighborhood where the mother was living, and pay the house in full, as opposed to having a mortgage and having that kind of debt. The NFL needs help. Remember, we have all these images that are hyped all the time. These are, for the most part, these are young guys that they have absolutely no idea what they're doing, and they really don't have loving, trusting relatives for the most part that are helping them through this. It's part of privilege that some of us have. So,
SYBLE, how much of this is being used in either premarital counseling or marital counseling, or people who are right about going to divorce, because they say the number one issue with a lot of divorce has to do with money. So if that is a big factor, I'm just wondering, not so much compatibility, but understanding reasons more so, and maybe an appreciation for each other's differences, that kind of thing.
Okay, so Tim, you actually hit the nail on the head. The Money Habitudes is used in a lot of premarital classes. It is used in relationship counseling. It's used in marriage enrichment programs. And it doesn't matter whether it's a heterosexual couple or whatever the gender differences are, the same situations come up. The point is, as I said earlier, that it's never about money, that when people are having these conflicts and stress, that it's about what money represents to each person. So if they never get to that level of conversation and they keep arguing about the credit card bill, there's basically no hope because they have to go further. So for one person, let's go back to security. For one person, security means that they can pay all their bills every month. And that may mean just paying the minimum on the credit card bill. For the other person, and they're perfectly fine with that. And paying the mortgage, they're fine with the high mortgage. Buying furniture, they're fine with having loans to pay off their furniture. They just want to be able to pay the minimum each month. If the person that they're married to can't tolerate debt, and security to them means no debt, having a certain amount of money invested for the future, at least having enough money to cover some emergencies, having some choice about how to live their life. Those two people now are looking at life very differently. So if they're arguing about anything to do with money, they're not arguing about money at all. And unless they start talking about and understanding what it represents to each other, they're not going to go anywhere. So the good thing with Money Habitudes, and it's really fun to do this with couples, particularly with the cards, that when you get done sorting your cards into those 3 piles, then you take the cards in the That's Me pile and you flip them over, and you'll often see shock on a couple's face as they see that their cards are very different. So where one has a whole bunch of security cards, the other one has none or one. And where one has a whole bunch of spontaneous or carefree cards, the other has like none or one. And the way we always start, because we want to be totally positive about this, is what do you have in common? Maybe the only thing they have in common is they both have 2 giving cards, for example. And then the question is, so how do you give? Because one may say the other, you don't give at all. Well, that person had giving and planning, and they plan how they give. The other one gives spontaneously. So they don't think the other person's a giver at all, right? So now when you start saying, what do you have in common? You're starting at a place that's really very positive. And then the next question is there any way that it works against you? So my favorite couple to talk about are 2 people who both had a lot of carefree. So they had a lot in common. They didn't argue about money at all, but they also had no money for the future. They never worried about debt. And I won't tell you that after over 20 years of marriage, they ended up divorced. And you know what? They ended up divorced over a money issue because they'd never talked about it. So, but let's go to the next step. The next step is, where are you different? And the next question is, how does that balance you? So when you see the couple where one has a lot of security and planning, the other has maybe status and spontaneous, where before all they could see is the conflict, it's like, okay, how does your partner caring about security and planning, what's the benefits of that? And how does this person being more spontaneous, how does that benefit you? How does that bring some good stuff into your life? So now you start seeing balance as opposed to just conflict. And then you go to, so how is it causing some conflict? Some cool feelings in your relationship, some tenseness and stress. But once they've started having, by the time they get to that, they've had enough of a conversation where they're understanding each other that it totally changes the conversation. And I do have to add that I have had therapists and people who work with couples around divorce, where couples come in precisely to get divorced. All they want to do is to make it a decent procedure. And they've done Money Habitudes, and they've said, oh, we didn't realize this is what we were arguing about. We can handle this. And they don't get divorced. And when I tell you, the first 3 times I heard that, I went, oh, yeah, right. But now, after so many years hearing it so many times, it actually works. Not every time, but if that's what the issue is, that they're not communicating well and they're not understanding where the other one's coming from, it can open up a totally different conversation and make a difference.
The attorneys aren't happy, but the couples are happy, right?
Yeah.
So by the way, if you're working with couples that are heading for divorce, one thing I've heard over and over again is before you go to your attorneys won't agree with this, but before you go to your attorneys, you should talk to somebody about your money, because it's such an emotional issue that if you at least can get the reality of what your money situation is and talk to somebody about what the reality of what you may give or what you may get in this divorce settlement, then when you go to a lawyer, a lot of that emotion has settled down and you're in a much better place to talk to the lawyer and have good conversations. And lawyers typically charge a lot more than financial people. So.
Got it. Okay. One last one. Vicki put a message in the chat. Given that the last 2 years in particular, there's been such a fewer people attending any type of house of worship. How is this changing the whole concept of giving? And have you worked with any clergy or have any experience with that whole phenomenon?
So I don't know what's happening right now, but I have worked a lot with clergy, and they really need help when it comes to money because they're put in a very difficult situation. Usually they're not earning a whole lot, and their religion has taught them certain things that if they're married, their spouse is coming with her whole story. So people in the clergy have a lot to deal with. When it comes to giving, it's an interesting phenomenon because many of the people who give the most are people who can afford to give it. And actually, I've had pastors say to me, we don't want Mrs. So-and-so to give us any money. We have to help her, right? But because the message that this woman has always gotten has been, you give everything that you possibly can to the church, and then the church will take care of you. It's kind of an awkward situation. With so many people simply not going to church or going to synagogue or any place of worship, that whole idea about giving, that whole way of giving, is not as big for so many people. However, if people have the message in the back of their head from the time they were little that giving is a good thing, they are going to continue to give. They may not give through a place of worship, but they're going to give independently to charities, to organizations, to the things that they believe in. And again, it goes back to their habitude. Habitude, by the way, means habits and attitudes. So if your attitude is what you think and your habit is what you do, if your attitude around giving is that when you see that somebody needs help, if you can give them a hand up, you want to be generous and do that, then you're going to do it regardless of how you do it. If your attitude is, people need to learn and pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and if I give to them, that's not going to help them at all, then it doesn't matter what faith they are or how they live, they're just going to keep their wallets closed, their checkbooks closed, and they're not going to give. So.
Okay. Also, be aware that this is a manual that actually describes it all. All of this is online, and Sybil, you can share with them how they can see the cards and the guide. I use this guide all the time, which looks at how people invest and spend and save and so on. It's a valuable tool, whether it's teens, young adults, into retirement years. It doesn't matter age. It's always valuable. So Sybil, how do they find that? And then also thank you from all of us just for your insights and sharing with us about Money Habitudes.
Well, thank you. It's been fun to be here. If anybody wants more information, you can go to Money Habitudes, and Habitudes is HABITUDES, moneyhabitudes.com. There's lots of information on the website. If you go up under resources, there's activities you can do. There's other resources that are there. If you're looking to use it in work that you do, there's some resources there that you can use. If you're interested in getting the cards, you can order them online. We have 4 different decks. One is for adults, young adults, 18 to 25, people kind of just starting out making decisions. There's a deck for teens, and there's a deck for Spanish, which is the same as the adult deck in English. The adult deck, the adult cards are actually online, and that's what you had the link to for moneyhabitudes.com. The statements are the same. If you use the online version, you get that full report. If you use the cards, you get a card that has a lot of that information on it and gives you information on how to interpret it. For the online version, there's also ways that it could be customized as well. So right now, we are in the process of developing a teen online version, and we've just done a ton of research related to that, and hopefully we'll have those ready online after the new year. Right now, we have them for in the cards. And something that I just want to pop in before I leave is, in doing this research, one of the things that we found, for those of you who work in mental health, is that when you're working with youth, there's no questions in there about the economic situation their family is in or how they're responding to the finances. And what they're finding is that the way a teenager is responding to their families, or their perception of their family's financial situation, actually is a better indicator of their mental health or their mental health needs than some other factors. So if you're working with youth, start asking them a little bit about the finances. And you might try using the Money Habitudes with them, because they don't like to talk about that. Right? But go to moneyhabitudes.com. Please feel free to call me. I'm pretty accessible. It's 406-361-8012. Feel free to email me, and you can contact me through the website. So thank you. And I know you all are doing lots of wonderful things for yourselves and for the people that you're working with. So keep it up.
I have one last question.
Yeah.
When we, because Joyce, what Joyce and I do, it's pretty much tied to purpose. And just like you have devised 6 categories for Money Habitudes, we too have devised 6 elements of finding your purpose. So as we look at money and all of the, the security, planning, spontaneous, carefree, status giving, how does this money tie into comfort with purpose, more security with your purpose, more connected to purpose, or less connected to purpose?
I'm not, people who really have a very strong purpose, and they just really know that they have a mission and care about things. I don't think it matters if you have a lot of money or a little money. That's going to come out. On the other hand, when people don't have enough money, or when they feel that they're struggling, or they feel that, or they don't have a good relationship with money, it's very hard to feel that you have the freedom to follow a passion. And so many times people put money in such a high position that they feel like, if I don't have money, I can't do things, that they put things off until they feel that they have enough money. So not having enough money mentally, not necessarily the reality of it, I think stops many people from doing the things that they say they want to do. And I think that goes back to that often what we say is not aligned with what we do. But for people who have a burning passion, not having money is not going to stop them.
Right.
Having money might make it easier for them.
I want to share a story that Tim might enjoy. My husband's kind of one of the pillars of our community. And so he volunteered because the Kiwanians, the Kiwanians were asked to ring the bell for the Salvation Army. And my husband decided he would do it. And it was a kind of a damp, cool day. And he's standing outside the local grocery store ringing the bell. And he would notice people coming up in their Teslas or their Audis or their Mercedes or their, whatever. And they just ignore him as he's ringing the bell. And the people who gave, the people who would dig down inside and give, generally rode up in a pickup truck, or were the workers, or were the people who knew the challenge of making a living and that we don't quite have enough. And so we feel that we're willing to take a couple of our bucks and put it in the Salvation Army thing. That was his observation as he rang the bell. It's the people who had the most. Just Steve didn't exist standing ringing the bell. But the people who have experienced the difficulty in having money, and maybe not enough, were the ones who gave, which that was his observation when he rang the bell and came home freezing.
Could I give you a different perspective?
Yeah.
For many people who don't have a lot of money, they're not people that see themselves as capable of planning to give, right? So they're not necessarily, unless it's through their workplace, they're not necessarily giving $10 a month. They're $10 a week to some cause. They're not calling up and writing a check for $100, right? This is a very quick, easy way to feel good and to give to an organization. Many of the people who are driving the Teslas, and unfortunately, I wish it was more of them, but the reality is that many of the people who are driving very expensive cars, they are donating $1 million to some organization. They're supporting other things in a way that's much more planful and that meets their benefits for them in terms of taxes as well. So, again, I would go, and I have to say, honestly, the only time that I typically give to the Salvation Army when I'm walking past that is when I'm with my grandsons. I give them each $1 so that they put it in because I want to instill that in that. But frequently I don't even have the money on me, but I don't like giving $1 here and $5 here and $10 here. I would much rather write a check to the Salvation Army or to any place. So it's really hard to judge.
Yeah, true.
When you just see someone's actions.
It's true. It's true. Yep.
But now I'm going to feel guilty if I don't.
Well, Sybil, I want to thank you for a do-over, and you're spontaneous and fluid and confident in what you do. And I can see why you have enjoyed success, because your curiosity has led you in the right place, even at this stage of life. And to be able to continue what you're doing, working with things like social media firms and things that are not familiar to us, or that we're not comfortable with, or it's not part of our old ways. The world of discovery is always important. And so I want to thank you for being with us and supporting us and your kindness and graciousness.
Well, thank you. It's been great to be here. And I think that as all of us continue to age, having purpose is probably the most important thing for us to do.
Yes.
And be healthy.